this is something I was alluding to before, and I think it's kind of interesting and people really resonate with this. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking it. One of the questions we often get is it more important to have a good story or good traction? And the answer is always kind of like, well, you want to have a good story and good traction, right? And you can see that in the top right quadrant here, where if you have a really strong story and you have good traction, you get a high valuation. The reason why this is the case is if you have a really strong story, then you have a compelling argument about a problem that the world has and why it's really valuable. And then you have really strong traction, which makes it look like you might be right. And your story is probably true. And so I'm willing to pay more money for that, right? If you have very weak traction and a very kind of like weak story, it's going to be very difficult to fundraise. I don't think you're going to be able to, because both things are going to be like not true. You're going to have a story that is like not compelling to people. Like this is a problem that very few people have, and it doesn't seem like anybody really uses it. So that's kind of a weak story, weak traction. The two quadrants, so the top left and the bottom right, I think are an interesting debate. So let's take the top left first. If you have strong traction in a weak story, you may be able to fundraise, but you're going to get a low valuation. The reason why you're going to get a low valuation is because if you have a weak story, it doesn't look like your startup is working on that big of a problem. So the potential is capped. And if there's anything VCs care about, it's that their potential is kind of like uncapped. And so even though you kind of like have a lot of people using it or whatever, they just don't think there's going to be very many more people that are using it. So they won't pay that much for it. If you have a strong story and weak traction, if you are a very early stage company, then you're probably okay, because investors in the early stage are primarily investing based off of the story and the problem more than the traction. And so you're probably in reasonable shape. If you are a later stage founder, and so you're like Series B or something like that, you really need like strong traction there. Because by Series B, you kind of know what kind of businesses is. And if they don't have strong traction, then, you know, people are like, this story is probably not true. So I think this one is probably kind of like the strong traction, weak story, and weak traction, strong story are probably where most founders are and kind of like where most people are. The interesting thing is if you have a strong traction and a weak story, you're obviously trying to get over to the right. And so you're trying to build a strong story. And if you have weak traction and a strong story, then you obviously are trying to just improve your traction to get into that quadrant. So whichever one you're weak at, you're just trying to kind of like offset and work on that. Okay.